Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Futurist Society, where we are broadcasting from the present and talking about the future. As always, I'm Dr. Awesome, and today I'm joined with Katrina Stevens, who is the CEO of the Tech Interactive, as well as a thought leader in the educational technology space. Katrina, nice to meet you. We are talking a little bit today about education and the future that portends for us as a society, something that I'm particularly interested in. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this position, and what that means at the Tech Interactive.
Great. And first, thank you, Dr. Awesome, for inviting me to your podcast. This is always fun. I run the Tech Interactive, which was formerly called the Tech Museum of Innovation. It's a brick and mortar science center in the heart of Silicon Valley. And we're really designed to inspire the innovator in everyone. And we do a lot of that through play. We also have a STEM education center that serves people from all over the world. All of our programs are designed to create problem solvers locally, nationally, and globally. And I came to this role not directly. I was a classroom teacher for a very long time. In fact, I taught English, although occasionally I would teach some math classes. And I got really interested in, as a teacher, all the tools that were starting to show up, a lot of the education technology tools. And I felt like most of them, if they had talked to a teacher, would be slightly different. And so I got really interested in how these kinds of tools are created. And so I ended up on the education technology side, where I really was trying to figure out how to get more educator voice into how things were created. Ended up starting my own little ed tech startup. And then I eventually ended up in the Department of Education. And so I was in the Obama administration as the Deputy Director for the Office of Education Technology. And there I was really around, how do I get all the different voices into the kind of technologies that we're using? How do you get the researcher voice? How do you get community voice? How do you make sure that the tools that are getting developed actually work for the people they are intended to work for? And that then led me to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where I had a portfolio of about $200 million, where I was actually able to fund projects that were around that. And then I got recruited to the tech and fell in love with both being able to do really community-based work and to be able to take that work to kids around the world.
So what are you guys doing in regards to education and technology that's interesting or different at the museum that you're in charge of?
Yeah, so one of the things that is hard when you're developing education technology is that it's hard to test. Because what you want is you want to be able to have as many kids as possible or teachers as possible be able to try things out so that you're tweaking and getting it better and better. But if you're doing that in classrooms, you can't, you have to wait a whole another year before you can test on those same kids again. And so one of the things that we're able to do at the tech when we develop our resources is that we have 100,000 students come through every single year. So I have an opportunity to be able to try things out in real time and be able to, create that development cycle but shorten it by quite a bit, and to be able to have a much more diverse group of kids who are influencing what those tools look like.
So what does that translate to in regards to things that are working? Like when you test 100,000 kids, what's working in those 100,000 kids right now?
Yeah, one of the things that, and again, this is something that was always been really important to me in recognizing, is that you need to design with the communities that you're intending to have the tools being used for. So we partner with local organizations. We partner with, particularly with schools that tend to have you under-resourced, and really around how do we make sure that the kinds of things we're developing work for all children, not just children who have access to science tools at their homes, or whose family might have engineers in the family. So one of the things we do is we design, for example, we run the Tech Challenge. It is the longest running engineering challenge in the country. And that goes through 12 iterations before we even have kids participate in it. And we make sure if it skews a little bit more towards girls or a little bit more towards boys, we keep adjusting and adjusting. Same thing for making sure that it feels deceptively simple, so that all kids feel like they can do it, not just kids who have been working on robotics, for the last 10 years. And so that kind of community co-development really makes things that are much more attractive and that kids are more successful in. I'll give you another example. When we created something called social robots, when we were doing all of our prototyping, we were using Legos for things. When boys saw wheels, they made them into trucks and cars. When girls saw the wheels, they just disengaged. And so now when you come in and you see our social robots, the base, you can't see the wheels. So we have to be able to wheel it back around, but it's covered. So it's basically skirted. And by like those small kinds of interventions really make a difference in terms of who will engage with those activities and those resources.
Mm-hmm. How are you measuring engagement when a girl is looking at those wheels and she's not really all that interested versus how the boys acted?
Yeah, so in prototyping, we literally watch, and you can see it happen in real time. Once we get to the stage where we have fully developed resources, we have different measures. So we talk about our work being a body of work that's around Spark. We know kids need to have 8 to 12 interactions before they think about themselves differently with STEM. And then we have a body of work that's around.
Is Spark an acronym, or are you?
No, we talk about like igniting that spark. It's a frame that we use around like coming to the tech, coming to seeing our TikTok videos, these kind of small engagements where you see things, you see people that look like you doing science and using and creating technology, doing things that are fun and exciting, until young people then start to think, oh, maybe I could do that. Because a lot of kids don't naturally have that inclination, especially if they haven't had engineers in their family. And then we have another group of work that's about skills and confidence building. And those are longer engagements like that tech challenge or the lessons that we create for school for schools. And then the last piece that we do is STEM career pathways. But we measure each of those differently. So for Spark, that's really around how many kids are involved and participate in a program. But our skills and confidence, we actually do like pre and post tests. And we've had outside researchers come in and be able to look and see and tell us, what parts of their mindset or what skills are they developing. So actually this idea of measurement is built into the work that we do.
What has responded well for the kids that you are seeing on a regular basis? Like, talk me through the system of education that you're presenting to them, because I feel like right now there's a lot of different modes of education. You have like the classroom model, which is like people sitting in front of a classroom and learning from a teacher that's in the front of the room. And then honestly, with the advent of the internet and Zoom and all these things, you have the online model, which is us interacting with a screen. And then you have other things that are available. Like what strategy do you feel like is the most effective right now?
Yeah, it's actually a really great question. It's one that I've been talking to colleagues about, because we don't do a great job in education around like dosage and matching, meaning that there are actually times where it makes complete sense for a teacher to be sitting in a classroom having a conversation with kids, and that's the best way to learn or learn a particular concept. And then there are times when really difficult concepts like anything that's kind of micro and macro, it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around how large something is or how small something is. That's actually places where like an immersive or VR environment can be super helpful. So there isn't one answer to how one should learn. We should really be thinking about how we're matching what that concept is with what the best way to deliver that. Our methodology is really based on project-based and problem solving. So what we bring in is like the essentially engineering skill sets. How do you try something, iterate on it, and this idea that failure is actually completely part of the process. So that all of our activities are really hands-on. They might use technology, but the core of them is hands-on. And I'll give you an example. We just got back from Kenya. And so we launched our tech challenge in Kenya. So it's the first time we've done a showcase outside of Silicon Valley. We had over 750 kids from a town called Nakuru, and they had never in their entire education careers worked in a team before. So their education system is structured so if you're doing a team activity, it's 100 kids together on a play or 100 kids in a sport. So they had to learn literally how to just work together. How do you collaborate? How do you communicate? And they talked about that a lot. And for the teacher, it was actually huge to like let go of that, sage on the stage and allow kids to be able to try things on their own. So we spent the first half of the year training the teachers. And then we spent about a quarter of the year doing small, tiny challenges to build up capacity and confidence. And then these kids did this flight challenge. And it was amazing. I mean, the change that you could see in kids and the excitement you could see in kids. They come in, they have to, they test their device on a rig. They get interviewed by judges and they keep science journals that are also judged. And then kids can actually get awards in each of the categories. But the kids talked about, particularly the girls, they'd never thought of themselves as becoming engineers, and ever. And so this shift in their heads around, oh, I could actually do this. And then we had this one young woman that I interviewed, and she talked about, she said, because her device didn't work that day. She tested it and on the day before and it worked. It didn't that day. And she said, normally I would be crying and embarrassed and I would be over in a corner hiding. And she said, I learned that it was okay. And that my teammates understood and were supportive, and it's okay for things to not work all the time. And then by the end of the conversation, she's like, and I'm going to be a CEO someday. So that confidence and that understanding that it's okay to fail, which was really not part of the culture in Kenya education system, really makes that kind of difference. Those are the moments where I feel like this is why we do what we do.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful. And I hope that everyone has an experience like that. But I feel like that's like a subjective measurement. Like I know that that's definitely true, that person learned this new skill, but are there any objective measurements to convince someone that like, okay, objectively, these people are learning more through this model versus that model? Because I feel like what you're promoting is like a functional model, right? Like where people get in there, they get involved, they use those concepts in like a real world basis, as opposed to what you said, which was sage on a stage, right? Is there any objective measurements to prove your model is better than the other model?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that question, Dr. Awesome. That particular, the Kenya, and I'll tell you about a few of them, but that particular work that we did in Kenya, there was a trustee of the school that felt like doing this was taking away from teaching and learning time, and was sort of very, very wary of doing any of this. And went back and looked at the first semester's grades. They went up 15% across all content areas. So not even just science. So there was a really tangible marker around that kids were engaging in school differently and learning differently. The idea of mindsets, though, is a tricky thing. Meaning like, how do you measure mindsets? Because that's something we look at here in the US quite a bit. How do you measure growth mindset, for example? And when I was at Chan Zuckerberg, we were investing actually in creating measures, to try to more accurately capture that, because a lot of times we measure the things that are easy to measure. It's easy to measure whether or not a student has mastered addition and subtraction, but it's harder to measure. Are they comfortable with failure? Are they able to grow? Are they all of those kinds of mindsets that actually we know are what really determine a lot of the success in life. And so we've been getting better and better as an industry with having different kinds of measures that you can use. We're fortunate that some of our schools use those that we partner with. We partner with 10 districts locally. And so we've been able to measure some of those mindsets, particularly around this can I like kind of a STEM identity we've been able to measure, and have been able to measure, again, that growth mindset. So there's a lot of work going on right now around how to do those. The tricky part is like, how do you make sure that those measures actually are measuring things similarly for all kids? So for example, there's a lot of work that has been done by a colleague of mine around grit. But some of the original, and that idea of persistence is incredibly important in terms of success in school and in life. But some of the early measures had kids who are coming from more challenged areas as being seen as not having grit, but clearly they do. I mean, it takes grit just to survive sometimes in some of these environments and to be successful. So that we had to go back and kind of redo those, and recognize it's not that the young person doesn't have grit. It's that what is being taught is actually not engaging in a way for them to want to have any reason to be able to persevere in that particular content. So it's tricky, but it is something that I feel like the industry is wrestling with right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I think about all of the different things that are coming down the pipeline in regards to technology for any industry, like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all these different things, I feel like the amount of rote memorization and even honestly calculation, like if I can easily get a calculation, doesn't necessarily need me to be in advanced math, regardless. Point being is I think that the majority of things that are going to be important are going to be those character model outcomes that you're talking about, like grit, like, perseverance, all of these different character traits that they're going to become more important in the workforce later on.
Yes.
Than just, information. I feel like information is going to be something that's just a commodity in the future, right? Whereas the ability to do critical thinking, some of these like soft things that you're talking about that we can't really measure very well, those are going to be more significantly correlated with performance, right? So is there objective measurements for that, or is that something that's kind of still in the subjective realm?
I think that there are some objective measures. There are some good ones that are out there. So for example, you can measure perseverance by looking at how often a student will continue to try something. So you can literally count some of those. Now that's kind of an unsophisticated description of how that works, but we have been able to get more objective measures. But again, you have to make sure they're inclusively designed. And that's something that I talk a lot about with my team. So for example, there was a classic marshmallow test. And the idea was that you give kids a marshmallow, they could either have one marshmallow now or they could have two later if they waited. And they're, some of the first things that came out of that, that's measuring whether or not someone can have delayed gratification. But it turned out that when kids of color in particular were part of the experiment, they were more likely to eat the marshmallow. And so the original, when people were looking at that was, that means kids aren't able to have that delayed gratification. But it turned out it actually made a huge difference in terms of who told them about the marshmallow. So if they were interacting with someone that they trusted, and particularly another person of color, they had equally amount of ability to wait. And so that's why you have to really make sure that you're testing the right things in these. And again, that's the part that you need more sophisticated tools than if you're just measuring whether or not a kid is able to, has mastered their multiplication table.
Yeah, I have a 2-year-old and I'm trying to promote that in our own household. I don't know how to do that though. Is there any way that you know of that is like exercises that you can do with even honestly school age children to promote their performance, and whether it's perseverance or whether it's long-term thinking, whatever it is, specifically the outcome of the marshmallow study, whatever it is that they're trying to measure? Are there any exercises that kids and parents can do at home to promote that quality?
There are. And the one thing I would caution too is to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate, because there are, as the brain develops, there are stages where kids actually aren't really able to think about time in the same way. So 2 years old is young, in terms of development and being able to really grasp what that means. So not trying to, and same thing when we talk about like ethics, we often ask young people or kids to be more ethically oriented before they're developmentally able to actually to master some of those concepts. And so one is just matching where a child is in their development with the right kinds of exercises. But there are some of the things that I tell parents all the time is that when kids say I don't know how to do something, just even some simple things like, well, you don't know how to do that yet. Just that simple reinforcement of that word yet
Mhm.
is the whole mind shift, that if you're repeating that over and over when kids are young, they start to develop that. It's
Mhm.
like, oh, right, I don't know how to do it now, but that doesn't mean I can't learn, because then the next thing is like, well, how might you, get better at that? How might you find out that information? So that's
That
one I
is
think that
so helpful. I never thought about that. Just
it's
like one
super
simple word.
powerful.
Yeah,
Um,
super powerful.
the other thing that I also will advise parents and teachers too, is that oftentimes we want to tell our kids, oh, you are so smart. Like if we've got a good kid who's like doing really well in math, like you're really good at math. If you just say that phrase, what happens as they get older is that they then, when they start to encounter math that is harder to learn, then they kind of shut down a little bit, because then that it's tied to their identity. But if you
Mm.
say things instead like, you're a really hard worker, where you're pushing on the skills that go into learning, and rather than just like you're a math person or you're good at X,
Mhm.
that can really change. I've seen this particularly with kids who excel really well in academics, and then they hit a stage in their whether that's middle school or whether that's college, where suddenly they are confronted with something that is not easy to learn, and everything has been easy before. And if it's tied to their identity is tied to the subject matter and being an A student, it's a lot harder for them to go like, wait a second, I have a skill set. I know how to step back and be able to work through this. And I have the ability to be able to learn this. It doesn't have to naturally come to me. So
Mhm.
that's one that's a little bit more sophisticated, but also something that can have a huge impact on how you talk to kids.
Mhm. Mhm. So, side note, how do you feel about long form podcasting as an educational tool? Because I feel like it's something that, as an adult, I find is like such a powerful form. But for whatever reason, like kids don't want to be talked to for long amounts of time, right? Like, what
Yep.
is what is what is the reasoning for that?
It literally is attention span. And
Yeah,
so younger kids have a much, much shorter attention span.
yeah,
It's the frontal lobe part of your brain
right,
that takes a lot longer to develop. And so it's a combination of developmentally,
right.
younger kids have a shorter attention span. But same thing in classroom. When I would design things with teachers, like, elementary kids, you design things for like 15 minutes.
Mhm.
Whereas in high school, you can design something for 90 minutes. You don't have
Mhm.
to keep switching from topic to topic.
Mhm.
It's also though,
So
young
I
people,
hear you. Attention span, I totally get.
yeah, but we're
But
also training
kids
that.
can kids can like play video games for
Yes.
hours upon hours.
Yeah.
So they're focusing their attention on this other thing for a long amount of time, right? So if that's the case, what's the difference? Like why specifically is it conversation? I'm not even talking about long form podcasting. I'm just talking like having a long conversation with a child is difficult because they're not interested in it, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
not something that happens. Like you could sit with your best friend and have a 3 hour long conversation and the time just flies by. But kids don't do that. What is the reason for that? Is
Yeah.
it still
And
attention span? Because I
well,
feel like again, they focus their attention on the television for hours upon end.
yeah. So and again, like, there's developmentally differences. So there's that piece of it. But then there's also our culture is also teaching kids for, if a TikTok video is 90 seconds and that's too long, what is that? How is that training young people in terms of like, humans have this natural wanting to have like gratification. And we've been training our society that needs to come more often in shorter bursts. The reason actually the video games work so well is that they're really good at being able to give you one little step, and then you get a prize, and then you get a prize, and then you get a prize and get a prize. So
Mm,
you're constantly getting hits with these like dopamine hits where something fun is happening, something new, and
mhm,
that newness keeps the brain that's engaged.
mhm.
I think it's actually incredibly important that we do teach young people and have them in activities where where they're not on tech, and where
Yeah.
they are learning actually to focus and concentrate on things, and
I'm glad you
we have to
brought
be
the
more intentional
dopamine.
than we used to get, just given how completely encompassed they are in tech.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the dopamine reward system in up because I feel like there is this focus on that with things that are consumer electronics or and any sort of like, stuff that you buy. They
Yep.
focus on the dopamine receptors. Why is education also focusing on why can't we use the same
Yeah.
tools that they use to like make kids know their times tables faster.
Yeah. And so some of that actually does happen. But I'm laughing just because it's an interesting dilemma in education, because there's certain kinds of learning activities where that makes a lot of sense. For things that are like rote memorization and not particularly fun, naturally, multiplication tables is a really good one. So teachers for a long time have been using, even pre-tech, you get a star, you get you do races in class for how fast you can get through particular worksheets. So teachers have always been using some of that. What we also know is that there are other kinds of learning that you don't want to actually do that for. There was another famous experiment where kids were put in rooms and doing puzzles. And when the kids got prizes for the puzzle, the next time they went into a room with puzzles, they actually didn't engage with the puzzle. They engaged with other activities. But kids who didn't get prizes for them would continue to do it. So there's an intrinsic learning piece around that intrinsic motivation that you want to make sure that we're not losing. And that's that I talk about sometimes where you might win the battle, but you lose the war. If you do so much repetition with kids, then learning becomes less fun. So they might master that particular thing, but they've given up on learning. You see this when you've got a little one. The little ones are like just curious about the whole world. And they go through like elementary school pretty still in that mode. And then as they hit middle school development, it starts to shift. Now, the brain naturally starts to shift to becoming more social, but it's also some of how we're teaching. If we kept the fun and play and teaching and learning, we come into the world built wanting to learn. That's how we master language. That's how we master everything. And so there are things I think we could be doing in our education system that are shifting that. We did a really fun.
The reason why I asked that is because there is a sentiment running on social media right now that the Chinese version of TikTok is filled with science videos, filled with motivational things, things that are meant to grow these skills that are possible. And kids are on it for a long time, and then theoretically, like there's this compensatory increase in those skills. However, right now in America, the exact opposite is true. It's usually non-educational stuff that rises to the forefront. So obviously there's a difference in countries using the dopamine reward system to give special education or increased education to a child so that they digest it easier. Are there, on the same vein, are there any other countries that are doing interesting things? And it doesn't have to be the dopamine reward center. It could be like, is there any other countries that are doing interesting things that you're like, okay, wow, like that's the future of education right there?
Yeah. And I want to pause before going there too, is that, so we have had success on TikTok, surprisingly. So we have these longer form videos that are around highlighting folks around the world that use technology for good. And then we take them and we cut them into smaller segments and put them on TikTok. And we had over 200,000 interactions with one of our videos that had to do with poverty and data science. And so kids will engage and it actually was not the one we expected to take off. We thought that we had one that had to do with animals and identifying, using AI to identify particular species. But no, so kids will, if we give them that content, they will actually engage. It was pretty phenomenal. And they were having the same kinds of conversations that you would expect to have in a classroom. So I think we can use the tools. We're just not doing it to the degree that we could. I just got back from a conference in London that was really kind of looking at the future of ed tech. And so I got to hear some cool examples. But one that I thought was really fascinating is this idea of leapfrogging technology. So in small villages throughout the African continent, they're using VR, but it's not attached to the internet. So the idea is that beekeeping, for example, so they're going into villages and using the headsets that are teaching people, villagers, like how to keep bees or other kinds of skills. So this really interesting phenomena, and folks are actually super excited, and it's changing what's happening in villages. So there's ways to use technology even in places that don't have the structure that's set up. And there's ones that make me nervous. And China does this where they have monitoring now, where They're monitoring kids' eyes and equating that with attention span. That one makes me actually nervous because we don't actually know what's going on in the brain because they might be engaged in something else that's happening, or I just worry a little bit around what the correction might be attached to that and what that does. But we're going there. I'm seeing, twinning, where people are creating entire cities, twin cities, so that you're able to like run experiments and figure out how people are going to interact and behave. One of the places I see where on the teacher training side is a huge move towards being able to use VR, or other kinds of immersion technology where you get to practice in a classroom where you have real kids that are in front of you. And I see that actually being a really a place that we're going. I also am seeing a huge shift in other countries where, and we're going there, but like, you raised this before, like most people in their lives will not use calculus. And yet calculus is this barrier for kids being able to, or entry ticket to be able to get into a lot of programs in colleges. Whereas of course in data science or even statistics is much more useful in the long term. You can teach some of the basic concepts in calculus, but you don't actually need to know how to calculate all of that. We spend a lot of time trying to convince kids how to learn those skills, and they will never use them. So I do think there's a revision that needs to happen in the US, and I'm seeing in other countries where they're really looking at what truly are the skills that folks are going to need 10 years from now, rather than just, well, we've been doing this way for the last 100 years. So of course we need to continue to do that. So that's a place where I'm seeing it. I also was on a panel, and then a panel after me, there was someone who was a hologram, who literally was hologramming in from another part of the world, on the panel, interacting with all of us.
Wow.
So that's like phenomenal. We have university students at University of Silicon Valley who are creating an AI for our lobby. And so each new set of kids coming in each semester are creating another set. It's a bound system, but we're introducing it next week. We're going to come in and ask it, what exhibit should I go see? I like this, or where the bathrooms are. But it'll get smarter and smarter as each of the sets of students are involved in creating it.
Yeah.
So there's fun things happening in the world. Yeah,
I think that these technologies are coming, whether it's to ed tech, whether it's to medicine, whether it's to dairy farming, whatever it is, like virtual reality, holograms, artificial intelligence. These technologies are going to affect multiple different industries. Education is going to be one of them. But I do feel like you have a unique insight into where the education system is right now. And if you had to choose one model, like which country is doing it best, would you say?
I mean, everyone points to Finland all the time in terms of being one of the, having the best outcomes. Part of why that's so successful is that teachers are given a different kind of training. So they get a lot of training on just how learning works. Our teachers in the US get very minimal. We've made huge advances in the last 10 and 20 years around understanding how the brain works, but that is not ending up in any of our teacher prep programs, or very many of them. And so there's a combination in Finland of teachers being able to get that skill, and of them having up to 20 hours a week where they get to design what kids are teaching. And so if we gave more, I do think I see over time a shift where we have teachers doing what they really do really well, which is actually that relationship building and understanding what individual children need. Technology can help with all this, all that administrative tasks that we don't really need teachers to be doing. For them to be able to get information from how kids did the night before, so they can redesign and reshift who's learning what in the next day. That's the kind of skill set that teachers can really have. And Finland, like, teachers just have more time to be able to do that. You have to be able to be really thoughtful about how to provide what kids are needing. The other places, Australia and New Zealand are some of the folks who are using, I think, EdTech smartly and thoughtfully. And then Singapore is another place that gets really good outcomes. All of those involve a mix of using technology in places where it's helpful, not as a replacement of a teacher, but also allowing kids to be, it's a shift from that idea of the teacher in front of the classroom, talking. It's where the teacher becomes more of a coach. So the technology allows teachers to be able to shift and personalize for each of the kids. That's where you're seeing the real advances.
Yeah, that's interesting to me.
Yeah,
that is interesting to me because, like I was telling you, I think that the information is going to become a commodity, and a coach telling a kid, this is how you get the best information, this is how you apply the information the best, this is how, like that kind of stuff. As a teacher, I feel like that first off, that's never going to go away, right? Coaching is something that's inherent in like literally every industry. Like you learn from someone that understands the system better than you do, and the information is always going to change, right? Like, I mean, even in my field in medicine, like, everything is outdated after a few years, and I'm sure it's probably the same thing in education too. So anyway, I think that that's an interesting concept, the idea of coaching to the information. Is there any country that's doing that?
And it's rarely a full country. It's usually more like there's a district that's doing it really well in other parts of the world as well. The US is so decentralized. So we've got 15,000 districts that each get to make decisions themselves about how they want to teach, how they want to, where they want to put their funding, how many teachers, all of that. So it's very, very, very localized. In countries that are more decentralized, China is an interesting one. And so I was responsible for the National Education Technology Plan. And when I was trying to get, and my team was trying to, get folks to adopt it and look at it, I had to go to 50 states, 15,000 districts, then the schools on top of them. China actually took it and just and implemented it.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of like, so it's kind of crazy that our plan was it was all like,
everybody has that friend that, just copies your work after.
No, exactly. Yeah. So I do think the kind of, how that happens. Now that's good to know, like, because if a centralized.
So how is it working in China? How long has it been implemented for?
Probably at this point, maybe 7 years or so. I'm trying to think about when
so that's, it's been around for a while. So how are they doing with it?
There's a lot of shift. I mean, you do see them using, technology is being integrated. They're investing in technology. There's
how did we do? How did the US do in regards to implementation?
So we are, it is against body. So it's interesting. I worked on a project called Future Ready. Came out of Obama's office of around Connect Ed. So essentially getting kids online, making sure that all schools had broadband access. And then I worked with, my part was, okay, once you have it, like, what do you do with it? How do you change how you're teaching and learning? What does that, just because you have broadband coming to your school doesn't mean you know how to use that. So I worked with over 3,000 districts and superintendents who signed this pledge and then went through a lot of training and resources. And so when COVID hit, I actually got emails from some of those folks because they were ready. Like, they had the infrastructure. Now there's still decisions they had to make to get everybody online, and all fully online is a very different model. But they were, like, those folks they understood, how to use technology. They had the infrastructure, their teachers were comfortable, and they were able to switch within like a week or two, were able to get everything online. And then seeing schools that just didn't, never had that, just really, really struggling. We had actually worked with a lot of the schools as part of Future Ready around those kids who don't have access at home. How do you, for example, you can have the tech go home, but not have to be on the internet while it's working. So being like these things around that troubleshoot that. Those they were able to actually just help where they already had sent devices home with kids that came with internet, and so making sure that there was universal access for kids. So it was very uneven in the US, but there were some states that actually adopted it and are now doing some really interesting work.
How are the outcomes for a full online model versus in like either a hybrid model or an in-person model? Like, basically, like the information that we got from COVID, a lot of school systems went completely virtual. What are the outcomes in comparison to regular schooling, and what are the outcomes of like a hybrid?
So our, the numbers across the United States went way down. Collectively, if you look across, our scores in math and English, math in particular, went way, way down. And part of that, some schools just literally weren't ready. So we had a number, but we also, some of that scores or account for things that are not necessarily the teaching and learning model. There are things
Mhm.
like suddenly kids were home alone without any, some parents had to go and work in an office. And so kids didn't have any kind of childcare, access to food. A lot of kids got their food through school.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of other social factors that
Yeah.
really impacted how kids showed up for the kinds of testing.
Mhm.
The ones that were most successful are often the hybrid ones, where you had some relationship with the teacher and with your peers. This is true even in the workplace. If you're if you have, once you've meet somebody in person, then the next time you're interacting with them in a hybrid environment, it's just a different, you have a different relationship, a different connection. And so those programs were often the most successful. But I mean, like, technology itself is just a tool. So it's whether a teacher, if a teacher sat up in the classroom and just still lectured you just on Zoom, then that's no different than being lectured to, in a classroom.
Mhm.
So if a teacher is using, it's like, hey, there's these cool creation tools. I want you to like go learn about zebra, and then I want you to share with me in, in a short video what we learned. Like, that's when you're using technology for creation and collaboration, and that tended to happen more in more wealthy districts.
So how did the wealthy districts that were using the internet only model to the best of its ability, how did those people compare to like outcomes in the past or current outcomes?
Yeah, and there were some children and across the U.S. who actually excelled in these environments.
Hmm.
There are kids who are just generally self-driven, or interested in things like computer science, where you can kind of just go as fast and as far as you want if you're online, and the kind of thing you're learning does really well with with that particular mode. And so there's some kids who actually just never came back. They're that this model actually worked for them to go to do it, to be collaborating online, and just to be at home. A lot of other kids really did not, needed that kind of that social interaction with one another. One of the things that we heard from our teachers, and actually we saw it in field trips when like after the pandemic, kids didn't know how to behave in the school setting. So they were much more, yeah, just kind of like weren't able to kind of manage themselves.
Mhm.
And we saw that like teachers are all over the US are talking about that. So there's other things that school does, beyond just like the math piece. There's also just like, how do you work with people? How do you manage
Yeah.
yourself and show up? So those things you really still need to have some interactions for.
Mhm.
But there were other countries who did much better. So I was part of a group called, it's a global group around the science of learning. And we saw examples in other places in the world where schools actually did almost equally as well.
Mhm.
So it's there, it's possible
Mhm.
for it to be able to work that way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that that is the case, because I do feel like there are some kids that would really benefit from an internet only model. I do think that there's also benefits of having a kid come into a classroom and interact with children and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But you know, the idea for me for learning is that there should be multiple different ways to do
Yes.
it. And so, that I like the fact that that option is still around. And that's honestly something that only happened because of the pandemic, right? Like, I don't think
Mhm.
that that would ever really exist. I mean, there was this idea, I mean, not the idea, but there is homeschooling, right? That's like completely online even before the pandemic. I,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
remember there are a few kids in my high school that did that, and then they just came and played for this soccer team.
Right. Right.
And then, we never saw them during the day.
Yeah.
But they would come for like, all of the events and stuff like that. So I know that that exists, and it's nice to know that they have similar outcomes, because I like the fact that that option is available to them. Um, my question to you, last question, is that specifically interactions with artificial intelligence. Let's say if
Mhm.
it's like a completely artificial intelligent tutor
Yeah.
or teacher, or whatever it is. Do you think that a does that technology exist right now? Is anybody using that?
It does.
And B, do you think those outcomes are going to be better, or do you think that those outcomes are not going to be as good?
Yeah, and it's something that is a field we're wrestling with right now. And I
Mhm.
go back to the idea of dosage. So there's like we need to be paying attention to how much. So for example, there's a tool called a mirror learning that does reading, testing reading and speaking, and then also has a tutoring component to it. If you're on that for 45 minutes a day, and it allows you, one thing's happening is like in China, it is allowing kids who are in rural areas to be able to get reading interventions that would not be available to them because they just don't have the enough people to be able to go out to villages and do that kind of work. That can be life-changing for particular kids. Now, if you are with that avatar for 3 or 4 hours a day or the whole day, what we don't know is how does that change especially when it's for young kids, change your kind of developmentally how the brain interacts with technology. If you think about it, maybe you don't do this, but when my GPS first came, like I named it, and when like we have as humans, we like to, we do this, we make things appear. My Roombas, like I talk to my Roomba,
Right.
and they both have names, one upstairs and downstairs.
Yeah.
So this
I
is a
did name my
human
Roomba.
instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what's the, we need to be careful in making sure that we're measuring that because this is here, like the technology is here, it's not going away. It has many ways that it can be super helpful. We just need to make sure we're paying attention to what does that mean about kids developing relationships with people and with, and we want them to be able to make the distinction between the two. We don't want that to get erased.
Yeah.
There's some really good work though that kids, when they're working with a tutor, are more likely, like an AI tutor, are more likely to be comfortable making a mistake and in interacting with them. So there's already some really interesting research around how that can get used. Because when it's an actual human, they want it to be perfect, but they don't feel the same way. Or if they're helping an AI avatar learn something, that also allows them to learn better. So there's some really interesting nuances to this that
have you heard about Moxie, the little robot that teaches the kids?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think those are all kind of great tools. And so one, the novelty factor often gets kids engaged in a way. And it's as long as we're monitoring that. Yeah, and then we don't again completely replace a teacher because I do think that relationship is huge in terms of what makes kids want to learn.
Yeah.
And we have robots in we're bringing more. We have our mascot is a robot. And I told you we have AI that's coming into our lobby, and we're talking about do we have robots deliver food in the cafeteria? I mean,
that's cool.
Yeah, so there's really interesting. And it's around teaching young people how to use a tool, so that I go back way to when you were talking earlier about, calculation. I remember when there's arguments around whether or not we should allow calculators in schools, and now it's required when you take your test. And when, spell check, kids aren't going to be able to spell. And then it was similar, like grammar check. Kids aren't going to be able to know their grammar, but you teach kids at the same time as you roll out these tools. Like, it will, spell check will tell you that your name is spelled wrong. Well, your name's not spelled wrong. Like, so these are tools. Like, you have to teach kids how to, like, they're going to be good for these things, but you still have to have this extra thing, like AIG, with the chat GPT, everyone, we're all talking about how this is getting used. A friend of mine, did it, and it rolled out a resume. I said, basically do a bio for him. It got everything right, but it had him at Stanford instead of MIT and Harvard. So you still have to check these things. Like, these are tools and they can help you generate. But we need to make sure that young people understand what that technology is, and teach them the skills to be able to how to use it appropriately, rather than just be like, oh, it knows the answer to everything.
Yeah, I think that, just specifically in regards to Moxie, like, it's super cute and it's like interactive. And I think that when you're talking about dosage, I don't know if this is an accurate thing that you guys have measured, but personally, at this age, I don't really feel like there's a maximum dosage on learning. Like, they're just like learning so much, like everything's learning, like, I feel like I could give her like a IV full of learning and it could just drip like at the highest setting available for 24 hours a day, because like that's how much they're able to take in right now, you know?
Yeah.
And I wonder if like that's a bad thing. Like honestly, I don't think it is a bad thing. And I think that the only way that we're realistically going to be able to deliver kids like the maximal amount of learning that they can tolerate is through artificial intelligence or some way of just like giving them information on a more rapid basis, you know, like when
But
she's just chilling and, you know, like, you know, making pretend, I know that it's helpful. Like I know that it's helpful for her brain, but is she going to benefit more from having like an interactive tutor that's with her and says like, hey, instead of playing make believe with this color, why don't you play with this color? And then, you know, like all sorts of different things that
yeah.
it knows will help her, as opposed to, you know, just her just doing it by herself.
So I would push back a little bit on that. And that, so one, I think when I talk about dosage, it's making sure that I actually think you can learn all the time. I mean, we're just like, so absolutely. The question is what kinds of tools are the best? So like how much of that should be AI? How much of that should actually just be hands-on learning?
Yeah.
Like with it, especially with young children. I mean, you know, that from your medical background, like the body literally needs to move, it needs to grow, it needs to move. And so making sure that you're interacting with things with your hands, actually, I still think is really critically important. Adults actually do this with young kids, like really good, like when you're learning, you're asking kids questions all the time, you know, so that as they're interacting with the world, they're doing that. But the brain also needs to rest. Like the way that, the other thing I tell teachers and parents is like, sleep is super important. Make sure your kids get sleep. That is the time when the brain, you know, prunes what it learns that today. It files things away that it needs to be able to know. But the same thing is true when you're learning. Your brain actually needs to have little breaks, because then it takes that time and actually files and organizes it. There's even research on you know, people that if you have a 5-minute break in between your meetings, you're much more productive in the next meeting. Just short breaks can actually be incredibly important. So making sure that like kids can just freely play and not have all of that be you know, structured, because it develops a different kinds of learning skills.
I think that the ideas that you're presenting are really interesting. It's something that I feel like I always wish that I had somebody to talk to you about. And so thank you for appearing on the show. The time is close to being done. And at the end of my show, I always ask all of the guests 3 questions. The first of which is always like, where do you gain inspiration from? For me, it's science fiction. I feel like that idea of a utopian society and a lot of the science fiction that's out there really gives me a hopeful view of the future, and it gets me excited to hear about things like robots and artificial intelligence that you're talking about at your museum. But what about you? What is your inspiration for what you do every day?
Yeah, it's a good question, because actually, I mean, I love actually science fiction and fantasy as well, because you can see things play out. And I love going back and watching like old Star Trek and seeing like, oh, we have all those things now, you know, just so that part is fun. And I'll, you know, also kind of in reading. But the other, honestly, the place that makes me the most optimistic and inspired is kids. You know, so when you let them loose, they are so creative, and they don't. What interesting, when I was talking about that tech challenge, young kids actually come up with more clever solutions sometimes, because no one's told them something doesn't work. You know, and so that they are super creative, and I see what they can do, and I see them, how they care about what's happening in the world. And, you know, we're trying to give them the tools so they can have the tools to be able to try to both create and imagine, but also to help us with some of the challenges that we have in the world. But young people are where I look to. They're the ones that I'm having a rough day where I'm trying to think, I listen to them like, oh, I never would have thought of doing it that way. That's pretty amazing. And they're the ones who are actually designing our future. So they make me really excited.
Yeah. So second question, you're in charge of a science museum.
Yeah.
Across the US, what is some of your personal favorite science museums? I live in Boston. We have a Museum of Science just a few blocks from where I live.
Yes, you do.
Let's say top 5. You have to limit it to 5.
Oh, wow.
Your favorites.
Yes. And by the way, the guy who used to run the tech before me is the director for the Museum of Science in Boston. So we have a good relationship with them.
Cool.
And it's a great museum. Also the Chicago, the Museum of Science and Industry. Of course, the tech, I would have to say the tech. There's Oh, that's so hard. Well, the Franklin Institute, I mean, there's some of them are just kind of classics that the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh,
Mhm.
I love. Yeah. And they're always kind of cutting edge and ahead of it. When I think about the world, the Museum of the Future in Dubai
Hmm.
is like really intriguing.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, I totally got to go there.
yeah, well, there's this huge robot that actually just greets you. It's like a robot dog that greets you on the front, and they're doing some really really cutting edge things.
Cool. That's nice to know. So where do you see us in 10 years? Are we going to have a totally different classroom? Let's even push it further back. Do 20 years.
Yeah.
Are we going to be, is the concept of classroom going to go away? What do you see the idea of the classroom and just education being in 20 years?
Yeah, and when I was at Zuckerberg, we literally thought about that. Like, how do we? Our model was 20 years from now. Well, what do we need to do now to get us ready for 20 years from now? I think it will be. Yeah, I'd love to say that we're getting rid of classrooms and that we have a whole new structure, but I've been saying that for the last 20, 30 years. So there is a piece of until schools aren't also childcare. I think it's going to be hard to have a huge shift on that front. But I do think that schools will be significantly more personalized, where kids are really getting content that is, delivered to them in ways that are, meet their interests and meet where they are in terms of like of what they've learned and whatnot. Help them fill gaps, help them be able to pursue things that they're really excited about. So I think I have a much more personalized system. We're going to know a lot more about individual kids and be able to have the delivery systems for them.
Mhm.
I can see, and that you see some schools that are doing this, that we will have some hybrid schools and we will have places where you're not going to a brick and mortar building. These experiments already exist. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get to be able to do that large scale where all kids will be able to participate. But I do see us having significantly more like AR. I think I'm fascinated with virtual reality, but I think actually AR, augmented reality, is going to have a much bigger effect in schools
Mhm.
and in K-12 education than I think
Yeah, I
actually
could
VR will.
totally
Uh,
see that. Yeah,
but I
I'm
see
really
that
excited.
layering of technology on top of what you're already learning, I think is going to be one of the things that happen in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'm really excited to see Apple's VR set because I feel like that's something that's going to introduce VR to the masses. Everybody's
Mhm.
going to want to be on this thing. But anyway, it was so nice speaking with you, Katrina. I would love to have you on again. We had a really interesting conversation today. But for those of you guys who are tuning in from the listening comfort of your house or watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. For everyone who's out there, I will see you in the future. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.